I wanted to celebrate the return of Spitting Image with the most iconic performer. I want to quote for you a couple of reviews I've seen online. From Fest, Nallon has an enormous wealth of uncanny impersonations up his sleeve, of everyone from Tony Blair to Anne Widdecombe to Robin Williams and Dame Edna and Yoda, and there are plenty of hearty chuckles to hold the attention. Steve Nallon is articulate and engaging, fascinating insight to the art of impersonations. Nallon's charm effortlessly guides the show along, and his said impressions are marvellously accurate. Steve Nallon and I have never met. We introduced ourselves on Twitter. I'm purely a fan of his multi-talent, vast voices and humour. In this interview, he was incredibly generous, not only with his time, but also brought along some of his special guests. Find out who, along with an inside story to a legend of Spitting Image, TV, and much more, on this edition of Eyes and Teeth. This edition was filmed back in June 2020. Zoom was very popular, but it does include interference, and at one point I lost a key sentence from my guest, so I have replaced this with my own voice so you still understand the story. It's the one with the larynx, later on. Spitting Image introduced us to some of today's biggest comedy stars. Biggest names, Rory Bremner, Alistair McGowan, Jeffrey Holland, John Sessions, Peter Serafinowicz. Have I said that right? Phil Cool.
Actually, well done.
Oh, great. John Thompson. I didn't write it correctly, but I've actually pronounced it correctly. John Thompson, Nick Hancock, Harry M. Field, John Coleshaw, Chris Barry. So many names, like Kate Robbins, Steve Coogan. But when I think of Spitting Image, the first puppet in my it's Steve Nallon. It's Margaret Thatcher. That's the puppet that stands out, I think, for most people, because it was, she had such a big character herself, Margaret Thatcher, didn't she? But you insinuated
she was a great character to do. I mean, bizarrely, my voice for Mrs. Thatcher the puppet doesn't really sound like the real Mrs. Thatcher.
No.
If you listen to Margaret Thatcher in an interview situation such as we are doing now, this is, I think, the way she would have spoken, and this is what she would have said, and so on and so forth. But what they said to me was, they said that's great, but it doesn't sound like, if that makes sense, with a puppet. So I said, oh well, I know what I'll do. I'll add what she's like in the House of Commons, where she was a bit more shouty. So to add to this chatty voice that we have now, very, very friendly, in the House of Commons, she would get really, really angry like that. So I developed this halfway house between the two of them, which is sort of half Mrs. Well, two sides of Mrs. Thatcher sort of inflated.
Incredible. That's the voice I remember. Oh, it's incredible.
There you are.
Oh, thanks for that. And there is a big difference, isn't there, between her yeah, I remember her shouting, because they always showed those on TV, you know. She always seems to be angry, but I think or was that because I watched Spitting Image more than I watched the news? Is it because we thought she was angry because you were doing her angry most of the time?
I think that is part of it, and she was okay with it because she was on television most nights anyway.
Yes.
But there were several characters I did, and people got to know the Spitting Image characters more than the real thing, because the Spitting Image characters were on television more often than the real thing.
Yeah, no, it was so big, wasn't it?
That was true for Roy Hattersley, who I did, who was deputy leader of the Labour Party, and he was the one that used to do the spitting. So I did him, and he had all the saliva to come out. And another one I did was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Romsey. And what was interesting about him was, again, he used to appear at Christmas and Easter, that's about it. But he was a regular on Spitting Image, and people thought he sounded like I did him. But what happened was he actually spoke like a vicar.
Right.
Very slowly in his pulpit. So I presented this voice to the producer, John Lloyd. He said, well, that's useless, Steve, because the puppet can't speak that slowly. You know, we just can't have it like that. So he said, one of the best notes I ever had from the director, he said, I tell you what, take that voice and make him 7 years old.
Wow.
So I took this slow, very deliberate, religious voice and made him a little bit younger, as if he was 7 years old, and he spoke like that all the time. And that's how I did The thing was, we were impressionists, but we also had to add the element of caricature.
Yeah, I was going to say it's all caricature, isn't it, of that person?
More so than
yes.
And the ones that stayed on Spitting Image doing voices tended to be the ones that could do the caricatures.
Okay.
Because not all impressionists want to go in that direction, because some impressionists really want to get the voice exactly as they can get it.
Yes, of course.
And don't want to add to it. But on Spitting Image, we found that even if you weren't a great impressionist, if you could put a bit of caricature in,
make it your own.
That actually was better.
Yeah.
But that's the same with your work as well. I mean, I've watched your work, and your voices have got to look like your characters, haven't they?
Yes, I've got a cheeky skunk. He's a kind of a camp skunk puppet. And Keith Harris passed him down to me. He said, if you can keep him like a camp skunk, then I've got a cheeky old man character. He has to sound like an old man because he is an old man, And I did use a Simon Cowell character on Britain's Got Talent. And I only said one line with it, but it was one line everyone knows Simon for. So I guess if you say things people are expecting...
But don't you find, I don't know about you, but impressionists, we have... what I would call, I'm not sure what other people would call it, but I would call it a bell note, and it's what singers have to get into the song. They need a note to get into the song.
Okay.
And all impressionists have phrases that they use before they do the voice to get into the voice.
So that tunes you in. That's incredible.
It tunes you in
Wow.
the same way a singer. So something like Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan Kenobi, I can't do him just from nowhere.
No.
But I've got a phrase I use, which is, your father's lightsaber, weapon of the Jedi Knight. And that has got me into the voice itself. But you know what I mean? You need that in.
Yeah. And it's like starting the engine to a car, isn't it? So
I like that. I'll steal that.
You can have that. Wow. But it is. It's like it's just like turning on the engine and then off you go. It's wow.
Of course, with Thatcher, I did her so often I didn't quite need the in. But sometimes she herself would have little phrases that she used. One was "goodness me," "goodness me." I don't believe. She would just. Not many people would have. Nobody would use it now. It's a bit old-fashioned, but she was still using it, So occasionally I would say that in order to get into the voice,
Brilliant. And you voiced a few more characters, quite a lot actually. Bruce Forsyth, David Attenborough.
Well, we all do Brucey, and I'm sure, my lad, that you do your own wonderful Brucey. But I think he's the most doable, because you can teach pretty much anybody to do a Bruce Forsyth.
Really? You automatically done the chin then as well. You push your chin forward. It helps.
Shove the chin out, my lad. Shove and all that. And I used to do him, sort of imagine him like a fly stuck behind a net curtain.
That's a brilliant way of describing it. I love that. And what about your David Attenborough? He's got very slow delivery, isn't he? But how would you get into David Attenborough?
Most remarkable creatures. And as you're doing Attenborough, you've also slightly got to put your two hands parallel to each other, wobbling up and down to get that slightly sing-songy way he speaks. And at the end, he does
wow.
extra thing. He's great.
Ice and Steve.
I was hoping you'd be in the new. So we're waiting for the new Crown to come out. I was hoping you'd be in the next series.
I think they've got Gillian Anderson doing that.
Oh right, yeah, I heard that.
But there were a couple of other options that were around, and I mean, I did some theatre last year and stuff. But
I've watched some wonderful things of you today, and I've been in hysterics at your work and your multi-talent of work as well, voices and puppetry, comedy. You have a great mind. Great mind.
Well, it's partly necessity,
Yes.
Over the years, it hasn't always been choice, but I've enjoyed it,
That's fantastic. Can I just go back a bit, Steve? You started when you were 16 doing comedy clubs up in the north, in Leeds. Are you from Leeds originally?
Yeah.
So how did you start a comedy act at 16? Were you allowed in the clubs at the time? Were they social clubs that you?
Well, no, I wasn't allowed in. I wasn't allowed in the clubs, and this is, I'm happy to talk about it, but my grandmother used to have to take me, because I live with my grandmother for various reasons.
Okay, yes.
So I said to her one day, I said, I fancied doing a talent show in the what was the local pub, and I couldn't go in by myself. So she said, oh, I'll take you. And what happened basically was, at school, we'd done some parent evenings with entertainment, and I had done some impressions of characters. I would have done probably Bruce Forsyth. I would have done Frankie Howard. Oh, don't, Mrs. All that sort of thing. Oh, yes. Oh, don't listen. I'd have done him, and I can't remember what else I did in those days, but I'd done a little act anyway, and I went off and I did the talent show in the pub. And the way it used to work in the northern clubs was that you did the pub talent shows, then you did a midweek charity show in proper working men's clubs.
Okay.
The concert secretaries would come along to that, and then you'd get bookings for the weekend when you were paid.
Yeah, brilliant.
And that eventually, I did start getting bookings for the weekend.
That leads you to work.
It was a tough life, I tell you. And they no longer exist in the same way now. I mean, I come from pretty much very working class family and stuff, and as soon as I walked outside where I lived, you could see two working men's clubs. They
were everywhere, weren't they?
Yes. Everywhere.
Wow.
Everywhere. And every street corner. But I go back to Leeds now, and I drive past where they used to be, and they're either no longer there,
shut down.
Or they're shut down, and they're carpet factories, or
sad, isn't it? Yeah, there were so many. We didn't have as many down south, but I remember starting out. My first cabaret was actually, I was 16 years old, and I'd done a social club at the back of a hall, and there was a live band. Yeah, I was 16, and I'd done about half an hour or something. But they started to die down really when I started, in the early 90s, and so. And there's no clubs. The theatres are going.
They struggled, I think. A new generation of people came along that wanted to go to wine bars, and also, eventually comedy clubs as well. The separate comedy clubs, places like Junglers and so on. That particularly in the 80s began to take off. They had Junglers in pretty much every city, and they, particularly, I think, the younger men stopped going to the working men's clubs in the way that their fathers had done. I mean, I got membership for my working men's club because of my grandfather, who had been a member for 50 years. He was in his 70s, so that's how you got membership of those clubs. But yes, they don't exist anymore, and it's a shame. And there's some great acts that came from Cannon and Ball. Came from them.
Brilliant
Marty
acts.
Kane came from them.
Yeah, definitely. Neville King. Have you ever seen Neville King, the ventriloquist?
Do you know I don't remember seeing that many ventriloquists at the time. I did see ventriloquists in the Variety in the
City Varieties. Is that Leeds?
Well, it was actually what used to happen. Leeds Grand used to do a variety show every Sunday. So I saw people like Bob Monkhouse and Tommy Cooper, and Bruce Forsyth, who keeps coming back, doesn't he?
It does.
Bruce. And
it's like a Tourette's type thing, isn't it?
There was normally a ventriloquist act, and you'll know him. I think he was called Bouchier.
John Bouchier. John Bouchier. Yes. Wow.
I remember him very well.
Yeah, John was great.
He was pretty much on every time they would book him. You see, he was very, very good. But the clubs used to have. I didn't work. They came slightly before me, but I think it was Ross Abbott was part of.
Wow.
I think there were Black Abbots in those days.
Yeah.
So there were comedy bands and stuff, and there were really, really good acts.
Great shows. There were big showrooms as well back then.
And Ricky Lee.
Okay.
They were big, and they did I think one of the variety shows on television, and suddenly, they became big names because they'd been doing the clubs. And of course, the Mighty Atom that went on to be part of the Roly Polies with Les Dawson.
Les Dawson, yes.
The Mighty Atom was Mighty Atom and her husband Roy were big names. So anyway, listen,
Wow.
these days are gone, but it's nice to remember them.
Yeah, it is nice to reminisce. But when did impressions start to creep into your act? Or were they there from the beginning when you were 16?
I think it was more. Mark Yarwood had a wonderful show at the weekend on television, and I used, Kids was big star, and I used to go into school, and we all used to copy his impressions. All of us did, and the guy said to me, I can do Brian Clough if I hold my nose. And I said, well, actually, that's interesting. I can do Brian Clough without holding my nose. And they said, how do you do that? I said, I don't know. I can. And then, I started messing around and doing the funny voices and teachers as well. And I got really I mean, I'd always wanted to be a performer, so the impressions
seemed to be very natural to you.
It just came out, you know what I mean? And it seems to me everybody does impressions, really, and there's just an age at which we stop doing them, and I just never stopped. As simple as that, really.
I was thrown out of an assembly once just for mimicking. I wasn't good at voices when I was 9-10 years old, but I remember standing outside the headmistress's office because I was mimicking what she was doing with her hands, trying to make my friends laugh. So she was doing this, and I was just doing this, and then she just... obviously, I was the only one moving my hands. It became a career in the end, but yes. So she pointed me out and sent me out the room.
Both of us, it became
yes.
What we were doing at school became a career. That's great.
Yeah, it was. It was my first audience. That.
Well, the clubs were. I wasn't a natural on the clubs. I don't think, because I was only 16, 17. I wasn't. I think you needed a big personality to survive the clubs. And I didn't quite have that, and I certainly didn't have that. I wasn't a natural in that world, and I knew that. But because of my background, it was the only thing I knew, you know. And comedy clubs in the 1970s, mid to late 70s, just didn't exist. It was, you had to wait to the 80s for those, and so there was no real, outlet.
Nowhere to aim for.
I did think about going to Butlins, but how old do you have to be to become a blue coat?
I think it's 18. I mean, I became one when I was 17 in Barry Island in Wales in 93, but they said you were supposed to be 18, but because I had an act as a ventriloquist, they let me in secretly. So, so I performed for that summer, age 17, actually. But yeah, you have to be 18, really, because you're working in clubs and bars and... where there's people drinking and things, and so I think it still applies today, that age.
My background was that, the school encouraged me to apply for university, so I got a place at university doing drama and English, and so that option, it was there, but I took a different path, really.
Okay.
I did get thrilled a couple of years ago when I played the Grand Theatre in Blackpool, because we had so many acts that were known. The top acts on the clubs are always known as Ray King, Mr. Blackpool. Do you know what I mean? And I just loved the idea that eventually I did play Blackpool, which was...
nice, at the Grand. It's a beautiful theatre. I worked there with Ken Dodd once. I only worked there once, supporting Ken, but they always had bill matters. Did you ever have a bill matter? Like Steve Nallon, what did you have underneath your name?
I had something like the Voices of the Stars.
Nice.
Or something like that. But I think that came from the old Bill Matter, Voices of them All, or something like that. I can't remember now.
Yes.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, on Spitting Image, I think this was a known fact that they would wait for the news to come out. Then wouldn't you film the day it went out on TV that night? Did that happen a lot?
What used to happen was we'd get what was known as topicals. So if those scripts would come in on the Saturday, and we would voice record them on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday morning we would put puppets to the voices, and then the show was edited during the Sunday and then put out that night. So they really were very topical. Occasionally you would get news breaking overnight on the Saturday night,
yes,
and then people would gather in a huddle. Who's got the best script that we can write this morning and record this morning?
Yes.
And then we would record it that morning, and it would go out that night. So
Wow.
it was very, very topical. And so they always left about 7 minutes in the show for sketches that were recorded
Pre-recorded.
that day.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's very brave, isn't it, for the producer, director, for the performers to actually go out and do material that fresh or recording on that day. It must have been.
It was pretty hectic, and occasionally we had to go into. So we recorded in the morning. I think our studio day was from 10 till 1:30, I think. So everything had to be done within that 3.5 hours.
Wow.
And occasionally, I do remember once there were technical problems, and we had to go over into lunchtime, which was in those days unheard of. But they let us go over into lunchtime. But the difficulty was that they then had to edit the show.
Yes.
And in the old days, this is before digital media. It was a physical edit. There was physical tape that was cut.
Oh, you're kidding! Wow, of course.
So
splicing.
One day, the one famous incident was they rang up the snooker and said, "Can you keep going? We haven't got the show." They said, "No, we can't keep going. We may not be ready. Could you just put an extra half hour of snooker on?" Anyway, that never happened because they got it done in time.
Oh, that's incredible.
On another occasion, they were still editing the show, part 2 of the show, as the first half was going out. So the show went out from 10 till past, and the 15 minutes till past. They were still editing that at 10 past.
Wow.
They had seconds to go.
That's incredibly pressurising, isn't it? I mean,
but we didn't see that side of it.
Yeah, you've done your bit. We've
done our bit, but it was close. It was close to the wind, I think. Yeah, it was exciting times. I mean, it was.
It was such a big show, wasn't it? I mean, they had the spin-off of merchandise. The annual. I had the annual. They had little.
I've got one somewhere.
Little puppets made as well.
Yeah, I've only got a few bits and pieces. I don't have that much memorabilia. I've got Mrs. Thatcher.
Well, she was a hand puppet, wasn't she, or something?
Well, I'll show you this. What I've got, and what this is a Toby jug.
Toby jug, yes, I remember them. Wow. And who's that on the side? The handle.
And on the side, the handle is.
Is that Dennis?
Socks is Dennis.
Dennis, yeah.
He's looking a bit pissed because he's looking fallen over. So
that's a lovely thing. Wow.
It's a nice thing to have. And they sent me that. I did some promotions for them, so they're very good, spitting image. And I'm still in touch with Peter Flock and Roger Law.
Oh, bless them.
Peter rang me a few days ago, actually.
Isn't it coming back? Is it?
Well, this present situation makes it difficult. They are physically made. They don't have a factory anymore, but what they're doing is, as we speak, they are building the puppets, but they're sending them to people's homes now. So that the eye mechanism gets done, the wigs get done, the internals get done, all in different places. So all over, presumably London, I don't know, but all over the place, there's probably Donald Trump in a cardboard box
in Slough somewhere. Yeah.
But I'm not involved in it, and I did speak to Roger about it. I said, look, I'm of a certain age now, and you need a younger team. You to do it, you need the younger team. And my understanding is that it's mainly for America anyway, so I wouldn't have been doing the voices.
Oh, okay.
And it will eventually, I think, find a home.
It'll be nice to see you back, but we'll miss you terribly on it because
they might get me in as a guest. I don't know. I mean,
hopefully.
I think she still exists. Does the Thatcher character as a puppet? There were several versions of her. So
okay. Did you? I know there was they all went on auction, didn't they? Did you buy your Margaret or
no? They offered me again. I did some promotions at Sotheby's, and they said, "Oh, would you like the puppet?" And I said, "No, I don't want the puppet." I really didn't, and so they gave me some pencil drawings.
Oh, nice.
Of Roy Hattersley and the Queen Mother.
Oh, lovely.
Which I have.
Yes.
Framed, which is quite nice, and I prefer those to the Thatcher.
The actual puppet.
I have her in my sight.
In a mug.
She's part of my. I don't pretend that she's not part of my life, but I didn't particularly want the full-size puppet.
a bit strange.
Staring.
Yes.
Bit weird.
Yeah, that's brilliant though. But what about the chicken song, which actually got to number 1 on Top of the Pops? Did you ever pretend that your name was Keith? That was such a big song, wasn't it?
Here's the thing, because I did some puppetry on it in the early days. I think that was quite an early day thing, was the chicken song. Oh, the chicken in the air, stick a deck chair up your nose. And what happened was, we recorded this song, which we referred to as banking, which meant that before the series began, we used to record a load of songs. So they always had songs that they could play in case of emergencies. Right. So that used to last about 4 weeks. What they noticed was that all the puppeteers, including myself, kept singing the song the week after. It was so catchy.
Oh, okay.
The producers aren't stupid. They picked up on the fact this was working as a song.
An earworm, yeah.
And an earworm. And then they kept putting it out every week. It kept being on the... And then, of course, people, heard it and thought, we'll release it.
Very clever.
And yes, we ended up... Now that I had very little interest in pop music, and I like Slade and Queen, and that's all I remember from the 70s, really. It was such fun being number 1 on Top of the Pops, because that's one of the things I could never in a million years have imagined.
No, wow.
That I would be on, and I was a puppeteer on it, but technically my voice is somewhere in the chicken song mix. So, because we all sang along to it. So
It was brilliant. It's brilliant. It's such a memory. Yeah. To be on Pop of the Pops and the Tops. But was you a puppeteer before Spitting Image, or did you have to just go into puppeteering as well as voiceover?
Zero interest in puppeteers.
Yeah, really.
Zero in puppetry, and in a bizarre way, that made me quite good, because puppeteers are wonderful people, but their egos are between the end of the top of their shoulders down to their arms. They're not egotistical people, because the whole point is they want this other creature to exist, and they mustn't be seen. That's the whole thing. They mustn't be seen if you're a puppeteer.
Yes.
And sometimes they could be very exact in how it had to be, and Spitting Image had to be made very quickly, and you couldn't be very precious about it. And I was very good at not being precious with my background.
Right.
And I just used to waggle the things around. And I think some of the other puppeteers...
Terrified.
Oh, no, don't do that. Don't do that with the puppet. You've got to be so gentle. No. I waggle it about. And so actually they discovered that I was quite good at it. And then they trained me up, and then I became one of the regulars. I was never very fit, so I couldn't carry the really heavy puppets. You had to be quite muscular to do that.
Yeah, they're heavy things, weren't they? All latex.
Heavy, absolutely.
But you had people doing their hands as well. So people.
Mrs. Thatcher had this tiny little mouth, which is really, really difficult to operate.
Right.
And really put the strain on your whole being, really. And she was always heavy because they had eye mechanisms which made them heavier as well. And she was, dressed up in heavy coats and stuff. So the guy that did her was the toughest guy, muscular-wise, very, very fit guy. And even he struggled sometimes in holding her up.
Wow.
So I did the little ones, the little puppets, which didn't have eye mechanisms and were a lot lighter.
Okay, I suppose the Queen Mother was quite lightweight, wasn't she?
She was quite...
On the shoulder.
She was great fun to do. And she always had the same costume. And no, she wasn't a heavy puppet at all. And I liked doing her. She was great. And again, it was a caricature. Nobody knows what the Queen Mother sounds like, but...
no, they do. We just adored her, yeah.
No, she was great.
Amazing. You worked on loads of shows like Dan and Dusty, Cat's Eyes.
Yeah, that was. I did. After Spitting Image, it sort of came to an end, and obviously Thatcher came to an end in some ways as well. Though I still do her occasionally for various jobs. I think, well, what shall I do now? And I thought, I know what I'll do. I've got this. I can puppeteer. I learned that it's relatively well paid because it's television, and so I got in touch with various producers and said, look, I can do puppets and I can do voices. So I did loads of series. I did a series called Cat's Eyes, which was an education programme. Spooks of Bottle Bay, I played loads of characters in that. And The House of Gristle. I had about 4 or 5 years, I pretty much...
Just children's TV puppets.
children's television, yeah.
Right.
And Dan and Dusty was adult.
I remember
television.
Dan and Dusty. They were on very late at night, weren't they? They were
Very late
cheeky.
at night. And,
great little show.
It was a great little show, and I was really disappointed that never got a second series. But, you know, as what happens in television, a new commissioner comes along and, you know, they want a change. It was a really good show to work on, was that. And we had some great guests. I remember Paul Daniels came in. We had, who else did we have on that show? Tony Blackburn came in. We had some really good guests. It was great fun.
It was, yeah, I remember all the guests as well. It was brilliant. Late night fun. I shouldn't have been up, but I stayed up to watch anything that was puppets back then, I think. That was my groundwork.
I'm thrilled you remember it, because we only did 12 shows, I think. You know, it wasn't on.
But it was like 40 Towers, isn't it? You remember the ones, you think they were on longer, because they only done 12 40 Towers,
Yeah,
only 12 Dan and Dusties.
I've got them digitised somewhere. I'll bring them out and do some edits and put them on Twitter or something.
That'd be good, yeah.
They stand up very well, and there's always been a problem, I think, for puppeteers on television in this country. You know, there's an attitude that, you know, puppets are essentially for children, and even Spitting Image never quite broke that. And they've always tried to get a late night, quite sort of risque puppet show going, and it's never quite worked. And,
No.
and we weren't that risque, but we were definitely adult. It was, you know, just a weird show. It was great fun to do.
You took a lot of your voices to radio and TV as well, so you did play a lot. I saw some of your round the horn things you did, Kenneth Williams voices.
I've always been Bruce. He's been on the matter. It's true, Kenneth Williams, and so yes, I performed him a few times in various situations. He's one of those characters that has become iconic. You know, he died in the 1980s, but
you all know that voice.
We all know that voice, and we see his image still, which is used. You know, I think we both follow on Twitter the sort of classic TV tweeters and stuff, and they're always putting little images of Kenneth and Sid James and that whole Carry On tradition.
Yeah.
So no, and he's one I did, and I'm sort of working on a project. I may use his voice for. I've started writing it, I haven't finished it yet, so I may use his voice for that. So
nice.
It's still nice to bring these people back.
Yes, and John Inman as well, around about the same time, wasn't it, with John?
John Inman, the thing with John Inman, very, very few people impersonated him, even though in the 1970s he was one of the biggest stars on television, and almost nobody impersonated him, but I did. And I had the great pleasure of working with him a few times, and then I did a radio, and I had my own little temporary show on Radio Leeds, and they said, we needed a guest. I said, well, I know, give John Inman a ring and ask him if he'll mind being interviewed by John Inman. So we did this interview where I was, you know, a John Inman, and the real John Inman was also on the show, you know. So
wow.
We did this bizarre.
Must have been weird for him to hear that.
I think it was slightly weird for him. He played it dead straight and just went with it. He was a lovely man, actually. He was a great guy. And, I saw him as Dame, you know, obviously, and he was one of the best dames I've ever seen.
He's brilliant. I saw him in pantomime once. I did meet him once backstage, you know. Yeah, brilliant characters.
Ice and Steve.
You worked a lot. Well, you've done a couple of plays for Jonathan Maitland.
Yeah, I did. Both playing Thatcher.
Okay.
I keep asking him to ask if he'll do a trouser part for me, so I can, you know, not have to wear a frock. Yes. One was called Dead Sheep, which toured very successfully, which was about Mrs. Thatcher's resignation.
Yes.
And then he brought Mrs. Thatcher back as a ghost.
Okay. Now I saw this.
Or an apparition inside Boris Johnson's mind.
Yes.
Last year.
The Last Temptation of Boris Johnson. I saw this. This is the last show I saw when the world was working, you know. So this was this year, 2020, in March. Me and my wife went to see that in Eastbourne, and I thought you were going to be in it because I looked at the programme and I'd missed you by a few months.
Well, I tell you, what happened with that was touring is very, very expensive, and the only part I played was Mrs. Thatcher. That was at the Park Theatre, and basically the producers worked out that if they could get an actress to play Mrs. Thatcher and Michael Gove's wife, it would be a lot cheaper. Okay. So I was part of the economy. They wanted me to do it, but they said, look, forgive us, we're going to
finances
rejig it so that. And I said, that's fine. That's fine with me. And yes, it basically finished its tour, did that, very successful tour, I think days before this weird shutdown thing happened.
Yeah, me and my wife were thinking, is this still going to be on? But the show was still on, but we actually sat not in our seats, we sat in the middle where there was a big gap at the back. We made sure we social distanced, but it was the last show we went to in the theatre. But it was a very funny play, brilliantly done.
It's very good.
Yeah.
It's very good.
Yeah, very nice. And you co-wrote The Ghost of Number 10 and the Nallon tapes. You've done a lot for Radio 4.
Yes, we did. I did some in the 90s, as well as doing the puppeteering. I mean, what I tried to do is, in many ways, I've never earned a living as exclusively as a puppeteer or exclusively as a writer. It's very, very difficult to do that unless you're absolutely full-time on, and that's almost impossible. So the way I made things work was I was able to do some writing, and I did some plays for Radio 4 and do the puppeteering, and I also did some cabaret, corporate entertainment. But again, I wasn't out every night.
Yes.
So the corporate entertainment was maybe once every 2 weeks, and you can't really earn a living doing a show once every 2 weeks. But together with puppeteering, the corporate entertainment, the writing, I had a good living. I used to go on holiday and all that sort of stuff, and had a nice house in Birmingham. So no, it was,
you made it work. I didn't actually know you'd done stand-up on its own, but I just recently seen you do stand-up, and your Gandalf selling washing powder was genius.
I always thought that he would be very good doing washing powder, because you may remember me as Gandalf the Grey, but that was before I discovered aerial automatic and became Gandalf the whiter than white, even at lower temperatures.
Oh, bless you. Thanks for doing that privately. It was brilliant. I laughed out loud earlier watching that, but brilliant stand-up. And I know you're choosing to do what you're doing. You're not to do live work, but to do voiceovers.
I think with the stand-up, I never really did it in the 80s. I did a little bit as Thatcher, but it was very, very difficult in stand-up clubs. You've worked them as I have.
Yes.
There's no dressing room facilities in stand-up clubs. To me, you've got very, very limited backstage facilities at all, because they're normally pubs or whatever anyway. So it was very difficult to get dressed up as Thatcher in those days. So I never really did them, and I thought, I do like a challenge. So in the 90s, I decided to, get an act together, much more contemporary than anything I'd ever done before, more dangerous in terms of what I could say to the audience. And so I'm not a big swearer, but occasionally it can be quite good, and be a bit ruder. So you suddenly had Patricia Routledge from Keeping Up Appearances accidentally reading some pornography, and it was
controversial.
It was
that works.
Funny.
Yes,
it works because of the incongruity, and you couldn't do that. Probably couldn't do that at Botlin's, but you could do it in the comedy clubs. And let's see if this works. It was a bit of a risk. It's one of the most nervous nights of my life, actually.
Really? Wow.
Playing comedy camp when I went back, because it was all new material, and as you know as a performer that doing 20 minutes of new material in one go is a real worry.
Yes.
None of it was so. And I'd written this stuff, and it went down incredibly well. I was really excited by it. So, and then I did that for several years after that. But when I did Preston University on a Friday night, I got to the stage where I won them over, but because I'm older now, I'm nearly 60. You had to win them over before they trusted you. Whereas actually, if you're 25 and you go on stage in a pair of jeans and all the rest of it, you're the same age as they are.
Yes.
But yes. I wasn't. So I had this extra hurdle of, I noticed this all the time of, that they would see me and they said, why is this guy who's twice our age coming on stage? Who is this guy? And then, they would mainly welcome me after a while, but I had to do that extra hurdle of winning them over.
Yeah, of course. When they see your talent, is it why is this guy so talented or so experienced? Because you know,
but you could see their quizzical faces as
yes.
they looked at my grey hairs, and I thought, well, I'm enjoying this, and it's a great thrill. You know, at the age of 55 or something, to be playing Preston University on a Friday night, I can still do it. But I think probably those things, and you get 150 quid or something. You know, it's not big money. It's fine if you're working the whole weekend. If you do three shows,
3 a day,
3 a day.
Yeah,
you know, it's possible, particularly in London. I've done that. You know, 2 or 3 comedy clubs a night. You open, you've got the middle, and you close somewhere else. It's not bad money, you know. You can earn reasonable money from it. But I think after that, I thought, well, I played a couple of other places in Manchester, and I played Beverley in East Yorkshire. That whole weekend, I did loads and loads of, you know, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I did loads. I thought, I've done it now, you know.
Yes.
I really enjoyed it.
You probably had it in its really good years, Steve. You know, in the 80s, television was at its best, you know, and Spitting Image was truly incredible, and your voiceovers. Your TV, the stand-up. I think you had it when it was good, when the world was working 4 months ago. Up until that point, I think you've got the best out of what you could.
I have absolutely no complaints about the way my life has gone. It's gone in unexpected directions, particularly with the puppeteering. But you know, in the present situation, to be serious for a second, it's the younger people that I really feel for.
Yeah.
People who are just starting out. I
know there's a couple of ventriloquists, you know, that I've been sort of helping out and advising, and you can't advise them what is going on now. This is not supposed to be happening, you know. And so how do you say to a young ventriloquist who's half my age, saying, how can you give them advice when we don't know what's going on? You know, it's sad, isn't it? Very sad.
Eventually it will die out, or that we'll all have got it, and all the rest of it will all be immune. But it could take a couple of years, difficult years, you know. I was going to mention this because one thing I don't often talk about, but I'm very happy to do with you, is that I did have some vocal problems.
Okay.
The vocal problems came because I was working on some new voices, and I was working too hard on the new voices, and I strained my vocal cords. They're not really cords anyway, they're folds. So I went to the hospital, and they put a camera down my throat, and they said, "Oh, can you do your different voices?" And you know, I did a high voice and a low voice, and they said, "This is absolutely fascinating." And then I did Anne Widdecombe at the camera, and I mention this to you because they said to me, "This is the strangest larynx we've ever seen."
Wow.
With the exception of a ventriloquist.
Really?
Because they have put the camera into the ventriloquist
larynx, and they've never seen anything like it. Wow.
They explained that to me. We're doing things with our voices, and that apparently changes the
larynx and
the whole larynx. And for me, because I was working on Family Guy voices for an act.
Okay.
And there was a character there called Chris, who's the son.
Yes.
And there's some great characters on it, but Cleveland and Herbert. Herbert's the strange one that sounds like a southern Dame Edna Everett. But the one I was working on that caused me problems was Chris, who's the son, and he had a very, very strangulated voice like that. And I remember working on it for about 45 minutes, and I never really recovered. And eventually, they give you exercises and all the rest of it, but it causes a strain.
Yeah, so you are straining that.
Take it gently, but and they recorded my larynx. They put the camera down and they pressed the record button, and I'm now used in teaching.
Using your medical failures as people's
that's right.
lessons. Yeah. Oh, bless you. Well, your voice, you know, our voice it's what gets us through life, really. And thank you so much for your time and your talent.
It's been a joy. It's been a real pleasure.
I'm a big fan. I love what you've done, and you were really joyful in the 80s and through the 90s. And I was delighted to meet you on Twitter.
I think I couldn't remember why I couldn't do it, but you had a show we were going to do together at some stage.
Oh yes, yes.
So let's hope that when all this I'll revamp the act. It'll have to be shorter than it used to be, but I'll revamp the act, and we'll try to actually share a stage together, which would be great.
I'd love to host you in that. That'd be wonderful. But you take care of yourself, and thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate that. All right, boss. That was the brilliant Steve Nallon. Check out the brand new series of Spitting Image now on BritBox with fantastic impressionists including Luke Kempner, Jess Robinson, Deborah Stevenson, Matt Ford, and so many more. Looking forward to that season. Eyes and Teeth was written, produced and hosted by Steve Hewlett. All music by Kevin Dean. Vocals by Rich T, Larissa, Lola and Nina. This week's quote is from one of the most famous impressionists in the world, Mr. Jim Carrey. Behind every great man is a woman. Rolling her eyes. In the next edition of Eyes and Teeth, I'll be juggling quite a few things, because I'll be talking to the hardworking and talented and Britain's Got Talent 2020 finalist, Mr. Steve Royal. See you next time.